Good morning. Today we will be debating. We have Nietzsche arguing the position that voluntary economic relationships can be exploitative, and No Gamble, No Future arguing the position that voluntary economic relationships cannot be exploitative. We will begin with Gamble's position. Go ahead, Gamble.
Well, as the prompt says, I believe that voluntary relationships are inherently non exploitative. The reason why people trade in a market economy is because they expect to benefit from that trade. And they're almost always right about that because people are uniquely situated to determine whether or not a trade is going to benefit them because they've got a lifetime of experience determining whether trades benefit them. So, yeah, basically that sums it up, and we'll go over to Nietzsche to rebut.
Sure. So I'm going to take the opposite position. I think that there are cases where voluntary transactions can be exploitative. And I would say there's a few reasons for that. One, I would say there's an asymmetry of power and knowledge in transactions in our society because of monetary and class differences and the structure of how people are employed. I would say that there's cases where a series of voluntary transactions can end up with unjust consequences because you're dealing with people over time. So they're usually dynamic and not static decisions. And I would say that there is an asymmetry of information for workers in our society. So they do not necessarily know what they are signing up for when they are working. So even though it might not be coercive in the physical sense, it could be coercive in some kind of social or mental sense.
And even if somebody doesn't know what they're getting in for, they can quit at any time. So even if the job was misleadingly advertised, they can, because they can withdraw their consent at any time. They'll only continue if they are benefiting from the arrangement.
Sure. And that's why I talk about an asymmetry of power, right? Because when you are a worker in our society, we all start out at different positions, for better or for worse. And so some people, it's very easy for them to shift jobs because they have more, wealth, capital, support, family. And it's very hard for some people. So we have created by, the current system of wage work that an unequal system of access to changing your career, your life, and getting out of a situation like that.
I agree that basically with everything you just said that it's unequal, but I don't think that necessarily translates to the relationships being exploitative. If somebody really needs a job, then the person offering them that job is doing them an even greater service. So they're being exploited.
So
Yeah, they're being offered opportunity.
yeah, so you can color it that way, and I think that is what generally these businesses do. That is they're provided as an opportunity, but really, this is why I say not necessarily, because I don't want to say that every single like case of someone hiring someone is a case of them exploiting that need. But I would say that often workers, employers know that they have an asymmetry of power in these situations, and they can take advantage of that in order to pay you less than what you're worth, or impose duties on you that you might not necessarily take, or stretch you for more than what the job you're doing is valued at. So I would say almost by that definition, it would be exploitative.
Um, so what would be an example of an exploitative employment relationship?
I mean, I would say overall, it's more of a case that the distribution of the kind of ability to change jobs is what's exploitative. So right now, I guess capital or employers, they have more control over what they pay workers and what they can get out of workers than what the worker has to change jobs and move careers and move up in like these companies and sell their labor. So an example would be like the fact, well, I would say one is the fact that like for workers to negotiate, they have to essentially join unions, and because to even match that kind of power of negotiation, you have to have like this whole collective bargaining system, whereas that's kind of the default for capital, right? Like they can set the prices for labor at what they think it's worth.
Don't really accomplish anything. A worker's wage in the market economy is determined primarily by their marginal revenue value product, or how much they contribute to the productive process. And the beauty of it is that sure, an employer can offer whatever wage they want, but if somebody's labor is worth, say, $15 an hour, and one firm offers them only $7 an hour, then another firm can profit by offering them $7.50 or $8, and so the wage is going to get bid up until it's close to their marginal revenue value product, or how much they contribute to the productive process.
I mean, I don't know if that always happens. I would argue that oftentimes the wage actually gets lowered because while there may be some cases where that happens, especially if you're in like a more like well-educated, desirable career, I would imagine that's often the case. For the most, you know, I'd say the broad swath of jobs, there's always someone to replace you. So I don't think that there actually is this bidding war going up.
There's always somebody to replace you, but there's always another job for you to take.
Well, I don't. So yeah, I mean, in a, I guess, broad sense, there is, but there's also always restrictions. Like this is kind of like the you can leave the country kind of argument, right? Because like, yeah, sure, on paper you can, but it's always a process that may like set you back or even destroy you or ruin your life in the process, right? Like you only have you live in a localized community and you only have so many options within that community. You can relocate, you can move to a different career, but like these are not necessarily like easy things that you just do on a whim because you don't like your job.
Take a concrete example: McDonald's worker. They go in, they work 8 hours a day, they get paid a wage. They agree to. Presumably, it's their best opportunity, getting down higher paid work, to go work at McDonald's. They think that's their best avenue for advancement. Where's the exploitation? They're voluntarily choosing to work. They're receiving a wage in return for their labor. That looks to me to be a mutually beneficial situation.
I would guess that there are situations where maybe the person is doing the exact amount of work that they're getting paid for, or that the person does not have necessarily a mental struggle related with working with the place. But I would say that that's kind of besides the point, because I'm just trying to say that it is possible that it is coercive. So I would say for the most part, these kind of jobs like McDonald's rely on the fact that there are like a bunch of unemployed people that are desperate for jobs so that they can actually pay them less than what their value they're adding to the company is.
How do you measure that value? Worker is paid.
You know, I'm not super concerned about that because I'm more concerned about the justice of the distribution. I'm not like necessarily an economist, so but or I'm not econ focused. But I would say that we definitely have organized companies so that the capitalist determines the distribution of those profits more so than the workers. And I think that inherently is kind of going to always privilege the owner over the workers.
The way that profits work in a market is that an entrepreneur who does a better job of forecasting consumer demand makes profit. So they're a good thing because they reward firms for bringing to consumers what they need. It's not something to be chastised for making profits.
I wouldn't say I'm chastising it, but I mean, I would say from my perspective, it would be the case that since the owner, I keep screwing them up, I apologize. Since the owner has such control over the distribution and the worker doesn't know exactly how that's being distributed, one, they kind of don't have a lot of access to the actual value that they're adding. And I also think that since they have no say in that distribution, they're being exploited because it's probably more likely than not that the owner is getting more value out of the situation than they're putting
But
in.
does that really matter to the worker? From the worker's perspective, they're offered an opportunity to work in the firm for an hourly rate to do a certain amount of work. So whether the owner's making $10,000 off their labor or $500 or losing $20 off their labor, how does that matter to the worker? From how does that change anything from their equation of I'll get paid $12 an hour to do this work?
I mean, I don't know if it necessarily has to prove my point, right? So like in one sense, they have to do work. Like there's always like people need jobs. So like it's not just the case that they cannot work. Now they don't need that specific job necessarily. But I would say most people who are working at these positions that aren't like teenagers are doing it because they can't get a job otherwise for some reason. But I would also say that to me, it doesn't really matter what their exact relation is, why they're doing it. I would say people just do it because they have to have jobs. That's just how our society works. I don't think they're making this voluntary decision to do it necessarily.
Unless you wanted to live off welfare.
I mean, you could do that and people choose to do that, but I would say that's one, there's work requirements for a lot of welfare in the United States, so that's not necessarily an option. And two, the amount of welfare is pretty unsustainable for an individual. I mean, it's not like you get shelter or like amenities that you might need to live in this society.
It's still enough to put them in the global 1%.
Um,
And
I
there's
mean,
billions of people that make
sure,
just a few dollars a day.
I don't do morality. Sorry, I don't do morality where I think, oh, you're better than someone else, so then your situation's automatic.
You say it's not enough to live off. I'm saying, well, billions of other people disagree. You live off much, much.
Yeah, so you're like, well, yeah, but I already distinguished that, like, live off of, I'm meaning, like, having a good life in our society.
But
I
not
mean,
live off of,
barely.
but enjoy luxury.
I mean, you can't even live off, like, food. For instance, you don't get free food in the US. You can't live off food stamps. You have to work to get food stamps, right? Like, that is a requirement to get that. So you cannot live off them. You would have to get charity to live off of, like, well, I mean, they just changed it. So now homeless people can get food stamps, which is good. But no, you can't. I would say no, you can't just live off of welfare in the United States.
I don't know the details of the American welfare system, but in Canada, people can and do live off welfare. It's not a lot of money. It's like $800 a month or whatever. But it's enough. You know, if you're renting a room or something, you can live off that.
Well, actually, and yeah, okay. And if that's the case, I'm not sure. I will believe you, but that's good. I think that you should have that option. I don't think you should be coerced to work. So that would make the capitalist argument stronger, though probably not.
You shouldn't be coerced to work, but
no.
other people should be coerced to pay for your lifestyle.
Other people should pay for your lifestyle. I would say no. I mean, I think that welfare should generally
paying for them to eat, and it's not them.
I would say that generally
somebody else is being coerced for them to live.
Well, I would say that I wouldn't say their lifestyle, but yeah, for them to live, yes, I think it is fine that a society keeps its people alive. I think they have a moral obligation to do that. So in that sense,
isn't that contradictory to say you're being coerced to pay for yourself, but it's okay to coerce somebody else to pay for you? And when in fact you're not even really being coerced to pay for yourself. That's just a fact of nature that if you don't eat, you're gonna die or whatever, you're gonna starve. But nobody's actually being coerced in that scenario.
I would say that we have organized society in such a way that you are not able to kind of live free of society, and so kind of the bargain that we make would be that we're going to take care of you in the most basic sense of you'll have food and shelter if you do not participate. I think that is a fine justification for that
I
arrangement.
disagree with
Yes.
welfareism. I think that it's wrong to pay people not to work, and I think that people should just work for a living.
I wouldn't say they're getting paid. I mean, I don't know what system you're talking about, but I think, yes, if you want to not work, you should get food and shelter. But other than that, I don't think you should be paid, or any sort of lifestyle that you're living should be necessarily sponsored. I don't think that. But to me, you're you're kind of conflating these two ideas, right? Because I don't think you're being paid to not work. I think what the society is doing is saying we're not going to let people starve in the street or like have a rampant homeless problem. It's more to our benefit to prop these people up to the minimum, right?
Or they could just work, right?
It's less.
They could work at Walmart or
Well,
something.
I mean, good luck. Well, no, because if they could just work, they would just work, but they're
Or
not
they
going
don't
to.
want to work and they'd rather just get the money from the government.
There's people who always don't work in any society, whether there's welfare or not. I don't think will necessarily change that. I think the only thing that's going to change is that you're going to have um not have people dying in the street, or like 50,
So
60
you
year
think the people
olds
that are on
that
welfare
are
right now,
like
rather than find
begging for.
employment, they just wither away and die without their welfare?
um some of them already do that with the welfare, like you see on all the time in the city. Like there's just people laying out in the streets, withering and dying.
I don't think
Yeah.
those people are withering and dying. They're just idle. The homeless people you're referring to. I'm pretty sure
No, I
most of them
mean,
are eating.
there's people that just starve.
There's soup kitchens in every major city.
I mean, some of them eat, some of them don't. It's harder to get food than you think, but
I don't know about your country. I know in my country, you can get a free meal pretty much anytime, uh, several times a day.
yeah, that's good. I would say that's how it should be. Yeah, yeah, that's how it should be. I agree.
But we're getting a little off topic here. So back to wage slavery. Can you tell us a bit about wage slavery?
No, what do you mean
What is
about it?
it? Because the idea, it doesn't make
Between,
sense to me. Like, how can you have a wage and be a slave? If you're a slave, you're compelled to work. You're owned by somebody. It doesn't really. The idea doesn't really make sense to me. Wage slavery.
well, yeah, sure. I think maybe you're thinking on it as an indiv, and I think this gets back to like the way you view economics and these kind of transactions in general, is you view them as these individual endeavors,
Yeah.
whereas I would say that it's more of a there's more there's more of a kind of emergent like property that society has of coercion, where you're kind of you as an individual within the society are coerced in the sense that you have to participate in this specific system. And over time it has moved more and more towards away from like individual property owners kind of living making their own subsistence towards wage work, and it's kind of thrown people into this dynamic where they're forced to pick between these different wage jobs, which and I agree with like kind of the discussion that was had yesterday. These wage jobs pay you for your time, and they kind of extract a lot of value because they're paying you for your time, or with a salary, like almost your entire life they're basically taking from you, and saying that you have to do these duties and you produce this much amount of value for the company regardless of what that actual value is.
Oh, so how does that relate to wage slavery?
Well, I'm saying that people are compelled to work within these jobs that all kind of have these same relation where they pay you for your time, and you are giving the person all the labor that you have within that time regardless of
You're
what
not
you
really
actually do in
compelled. You
that time.
choose to.
Well, you're compelled because you don't have another option. You have to work. I mean, you could get lucky and make your own business, but I mean, not every. It's also a fact that not everyone in our society could be a small Like that's just not going to happen. There's always going to be wage workers
It's
given the
always
system.
been a
So we are
feature of
compelled to work
humanity is
in the
that,
sense that we have
ever
to.
since we first evolved, 2 million years ago, you had to go out and hunt and forage or you would starve. The beauty of the capitalist economy is that it only takes a tiny fraction of the time it used to take in order to meet your daily caloric needs. That's why, we no longer have the issue of starvation. In fact, we have quite the opposite problem with obesity because it's so easy to earn enough calories to meet your daily needs.
Sure. I mean, I would not argue that capitalism is worse than what we had before. I mean, not even Karl Marx would do that. But what I would argue is that I don't like, and you often say like, oh, it could be worse, but I just don't like. I think I argue that it could be better, and we could restore some aspect of our relationship to ourselves and our communities by taking away some of the burden that we are kind of forced to. I don't even know. Like I think I want to say that like what I care about is that the workers, you as a worker, are able to have more say in where you work, what you're doing. You have ability to transition between jobs. I'm not saying that people should be able to just not work. I'm not like an
Because that's a
anti-work
movement.
person.
There is like an anti-work movement.
Yeah, I disagree with them. I think they're stupid. But I'm just saying that I think that like it's coercive in the sense that you're forced to work for these companies on their terms. It's very rare that you're able to
But
work
one
on your
thing
own
I would
terms.
say is that the economy is already moving in that direction somewhat. Freelancing has become a much bigger thing over the last 20, 30 years. We've got the internet marketplace, which has really facilitated a lot of that. You could have clients anywhere around the world. You can work from anywhere in the world. That's why more people are becoming digital nomads. So, to a degree, that's already happening without any overwhelming systemic change.
Um, I mean, yes and no. I think the internet actually did increase some freedom for people for a bit. I think the tendency is to conglomerate as we're seeing now. So a lot of these like independent like media kind of enterprises or like shops, they're gradually being bought up and put out of business by the larger companies, and then they restrict the same kind of wage relations that you have in every other
But
career. So I would say,
wage
yeah,
labor is
I mean,
popular for a
definitely.
reason, right? Like you mentioned how difficult it can be to run your own business. I agree. You take a lot of risk, and it's uncertain. If you don't have a lot of capital, money, then it might not work out. Whereas if you're simply selling your labor, you get that money right away or every 2 weeks. So there's a lot of advantages to the wage labor system.
I would say that no, I don't think it's popular. I think that it is by design the thing that we have. We have capital and you have labor. You can be a capitalist or you can be in labor. There's
The
not much
divide
else you can
between
do between.
capitalist and
Um,
worker
to
is
be a
very
capitalist,
murky in the modern area. Anybody can buy shares in any company and be a capitalist.
yeah, but I would say what makes you a capitalist is that you live solely off of capital, right? Like just
But
having
if you
shares
owned
in
a
a company, I
company,
wouldn't
you
say
would you
make you a
would you would be a
capitalist. In fact,
capitalist.
mostly that's just, I would say if you can live off of your own labor without being paid by someone else, yes, you are a capitalist.
Mm.
You'd be like petty
Well, it's
bourgeois
a
or
semantic
something.
distinction, but the point is that anybody can be part of the ownership class simply by acquiring stocks, right? And I would say something like 50%, I don't know the exact statistics, I read it somewhere, 50% of workers own shares in companies.
Yeah, to me, I mean, most people own shares because either they that is what their company compensates them in, or it's part of a retirement plan. I don't think it's.
But
I don't think that
they
makes
are
them
owning
capitalists.
business, owning
But yeah,
capital.
I mean, well, they're owning a fraction of it. I mean, they're. I mean, how many to actually have a say in the
But do
company?
you
You have
really
to
want to have
have a
the
lot
say,
more
or
than
do you
just
just want to
own some
own it and get
shares.
the money? Like,
Um, I think from my perspective, and I think we're talking about maybe some the nature of being in a workplace, I would say for it to be non-exploitative, the worker would have to have some say, regardless of whether they want it or not. They would have to be able to choose to not have that say. But right now, they
so
don't choose to have
exploitation.
it.
What is exploitation? How can we define that? Is that you're taking advantage of somebody? How would you define the term? I think if we're going to argue about or debate about exploitation, it's useful to define the word.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been using it in two senses pretty consistently, and I've been trying not to conflate them, but I think they overlap. Is one, it, economic relations can be exploitative if you're taking more value from the person than what they're giving you. And I would say, two, there's kind of a mental coercive aspect where like a person is forced into doing something that they wouldn't otherwise do
Okay,
given a
so
like fair
looking at
playing
that
field.
first definition, you say it's if you take more value from somebody than they're giving you. So what do you mean by that? Somebody's working for you. You're paying them $12 an hour, but they're giving you. What do you mean by that?
Sure. I would say because there's an information asymmetry, you don't really know what you're producing for the company. So you're always going to be maybe the
In
case
which
that you
case,
get
the
more
worker
money
would be
even,
exploiting
or
the
maybe the case
company,
that you get less, but I would
the capitalist.
um it would depend because I would say there's not necessarily a power dynamic there where but cuz I don't think a
Oh, it's not
capitalist would allow
possible.
them to continue to exploit the company, right? Because they wouldn't be making a profit. I wouldn't say it's not possible. I just think it would be
But
like
in
a
that
very
rare
rare situation
situation,
that you
would
have to
the
have a really
exploitation be going
dumb.
the other way? Would the worker be exploiting the capitalist?
Sure. I think people do it with even like the welfare system, right? Like you were saying, like there are like rare cases where individuals are taking advantage of that. But that doesn't mean that that's the norm
Edge
or that
cases.
like these are marginal cases, right? Yeah, you would have to be like a
So back
very dumb
to
capitalist
the
to
more
even allow
common
that to
case
happen.
where the worker is being exploited. Let's just flesh that out a little more. So they're getting paid $12 an hour. What do you mean they're giving you? They're what do you mean by giving you in that context?
Yeah, I wasn't sure exactly
Yeah,
how I
so
phrased it.
you were
So could
saying
you maybe
they're getting
repeat?
paid a certain amount, but they're giving you more. So their labor is worth more, maybe, or
Gotcha. Yeah, so you get paid that $12 an hour to be in the building regardless of what you produce, right? So it may be the case, and it probably is the case, that you're contributing a larger fraction to that profit that is being derived than what you're being distributed. And you're getting the same amount of distribution generally, regardless of whether that company's profit goes up or down. Now, oftentimes companies will raise the wages, but I would say over time, that tendency is to go further and further down
this
because
is
the
the
company
Marxist
will
theory of
make
surplus
less off of
value,
their
right?
profits.
That the way that a capitalist earns profit is by taking the surplus value from the worker. They're paid $12 an hour. Their labor is worth $15 an hour. They're extracting that $3 of value. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily a Marxist because I think that there might be other ways for capitalists to gain value besides that. But yeah, I think that is definitely a way
But the
that capitalists
capitalist
derive
is
value,
providing the equipment,
and it's one of the
the
primary
business.
ones.
Don't they deserve compensation for that? Like,
Yes. Yeah, I think they deserve compensation. I just think that they shouldn't be
but
the
they're
only
not
ones
because the
determining what
workers
that compensation
also
is,
like
right?
the owner could
Like I
unilaterally
would
say, "I'll pay you $3 an hour," and you can just say no, right? So that's you're not deciding it unilaterally. It's a negotiation.
well, this is what well, that's where coercion comes in, right? Because I think in our society, capital has more power. They have more power over the government. They have more power
But isn't
over
the power really equal?
what wages are
Because
set
sorry,
at. They
go
have
ahead.
more
Sorry, shouldn't
ability to
interrupt.
bust unions.
Yeah.
Well, hold on. I have more to my list. They have like a body of unemployed workers who are always looking for jobs, so they can always undercut you. They even I've seen it happen where they will bring in people that aren't qualified to do the job just to break a strike, for instance, and then they'll go back to the more uh, qualified workers after the fact, after they've broken the strike.
But isn't the power
So
equal
I just think they
because
have more
either
tools.
side
They
can
have more
say no
tools in their
to the
box.
arrangement?
Well, it's not the case that a worker can just say no, because I think for the capitalist, since I've already defined capitalists from my perspective as people that can live off of the capital, then they don't need the worker. They can get different workers. Like these are interchangeable people to
But
them.
they can't
Whereas
get
the
different
worker,
jobs.
they need the
The
job, and like you
businesses
can't.
aren't
And
interchangeable to them.
well, they can, but for no, I'll give you an example. Right now, I hate my job personally. I think I have
Huh.
bad administration for it. I'm trying to find a new job. I can't just quit my job though. I have rent to pay. I have bills. I have a life in the city. I can't just move. I have a girlfriend that lives here. So I am forced to work at this job more so than I would because I cannot just end the arrangement until I find a new job, which I think, that's how life is. I'm not complaining about it. I'm looking for another job. But, and this is anecdotal, but I'm just trying to give it more, I think it illustrates the power dynamic. Um, but the capitalists, they can fire you and it will do almost nothing to their business. They will do that in a second. In fact, most states in the United States, they're at will. So they can just fire you on a whim and they
But
won't blink an
are
eye
you
at that. So
opposed to
there's
at
not
will
an equal
employment?
power dynamic there. I am, yeah.
But
I think there
you
should
want
be
to
a
be able to just
process to
quit,
fire
right?
someone.
So why shouldn't the relationship be equal? You can quit at any time. They can fire you at any time. That's
Um,
equal. Either side can withdraw from the agreement.
I think in an ideal world that might work, but since as I'm illustrating to you, or at least I'm hoping that I am, there's an unequal balance, and so the removing at will is just a way of restoring that balance in some way. But no, I would say yes. In an ideal sense, you
But
wouldn't need it. But
American wages are much higher than, say, European wages, perhaps in part because of at will employment and the lack of um, bureaucracy surrounded with hiring and firing people.
I mean, I'm not sure if the real wages are higher or the cost of living's lower. To me, that's data that
I
I
think
don't
it's
want to
pretty
make
clear that
claims
wages are
about.
a lot higher in America than Europe. But if you don't want to get into that, that's fine. We don't have to. It's not really germane to our topic.
Yeah, I don't want to make statements
Right.
about
Yeah.
stuff I
I
don't
mean,
have
we're
the data
wandering
about or know
pretty far
about.
off
So,
topic at this point. So, yeah, go ahead.
okay.
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
let's
okay,
circle
cool.
back
We can try to bring it
to
back. I mean, what do you think the crux of
I
what do
guess
you think the crux of our
it
disagreement
it
is
seems to
right
me that if
now?
we're going to label wage labor as exploitative, then I think the term is so broad as to be meaningless.
Yeah, I mean, I just would say that it's meaningful because it illustrates how wage labor is an extension of previous forms of like class division and like exploitation of people
The thing
who
is,
are
there's no real conflict
a lower
between
class. I
the
think
wealthy and the poor.
it's a way of
They
create.
interact symbiotically, because a wealthy person, they need labor, so they hire the worker. The worker needs money; they don't have any money, but they can trade their labor. So that's a mutually beneficial exchange. There's no conflict there.
Well, I don't think it's symbiotic because in one sense you have a person who or a class of people that they don't need the workers really. They can live off the land that they have. They can live off the capital that they have. They choose to make more capital and reproduce it. And some workers benefit from that in the process. Some people are lose in the process,
But if the
but
worker's need is
I wouldn't
greater,
say
that
it's
means they
just a
benefit
symbiotic
more from the
relationship.
relationship.
Oh, well, I
As per
think the
your
workers' need is
logic, the
greater
worker would
because
starve
of
to
the
death without
relationship.
the
So it's
capitalist.
kind of like,
Ergo, the capitalist is saving the worker from starving to death and should be glorified for their heroic actions.
well, no, I think that if the the
For
fact
the
that you
capitalists,
would
they can
starve to
just sit
death
in their
if you don't work
mansion
for
and
the
eat their
capitalists is
cake. They don't
illustrating the
need the
point,
workers, as you've
right?
already
Like,
illustrated at length. So they're really doing the worker a favor by creating jobs for them.
I think they want more wealth, and they want because, and I don't know if we have to explore all the psychological reasons why they create more wealth. It could be some kind of compulsion, could just be the system that we live in. It could be that you have to constantly reproduce wealth to keep it in some sense, which I would imagine is the case. But I don't think that they are just doing it out of the goodness of their
All right,
hearts or
let's go
anything.
overseas for a
It's
second.
the
All
system
right,
that we have,
you're
and
I'm assuming
people are
you're
well
against
taught.
sweatshops, right? A factory goes overseas, employs
Sure.
people in
Yeah.
poor working conditions, pays them just $1 an hour. It's a terrible thing. They're being exploited, right? But the people choose to work there.
Yeah. I mean, I would have to know more
So if they
specifics,
choose
but
to
yeah.
work there, it must be their best option. It must mean the
Well, they choose to work
alternatives
there
are
because
even worse
they need money,
than
right?
working for $1 an hour in poor conditions, right? Maybe not working at all, languishing in poverty, working for even less money in even worse conditions or a harder job. Ergo,
Well, I would say not even. No, well, hold on. There's no ergo yet. I would say not even necessarily, because again, there's an asymmetry of information. I don't even know if
but
they
surely
always
they
know what they're
discover
signing
what
up
they're in
for, or if they
for
know
after
that
the
there's
first
other
week of work.
possibilities. I would say that. I mean, you don't even know if like the long term prospects of working there are actually going to be worse for you than not working there. I just don't. There's definitely an asymmetry. Like for instance, I think the cobalt mine is a big one that's in the news lately. Um, Working there is very toxic to your health. It might be the case that if they were not working there, they would actually have similar, if
But
not
you think
worse.
you're in a
I'm
better
sorry, better
position to
outcomes.
make
I
that
just don't know. I
determination than
mean,
that individual?
I wouldn't say it's just necessarily. I think
I'm not
the
talking about the
company is
company. I'm
because
talking
they
about you.
know what
You're in a
is
better
they're doing to these
position
people,
to
but we
make
don't
that
know that
determination
information.
than
It's
that
not
individual. You've never been to the mine. You don't know who that
it could be
person
the
is.
case,
You have
yeah.
no
If I know
idea
more
what the
information than
effect
them.
is on their
I
body.
mean,
They're
I don't know.
experiencing it every day. They know themselves. I mean, they know how much they need the money. They're in a much better position to make that decision than you are.
Sure. I mean, I don't think they are. I mean, necessarily so. It may be the case. I mean, if you gave me a list of all the hazards of mining and I knew what profit the company was making off of them, and I knew what their other range of options were, and they didn't because of I don't know what their situation is, where they live. Maybe they're poorly educated or unable to be explained to, or someone convinced them and roped them into this. Like through some kind of like poaching thing, then I would say, yeah, maybe I could be in the better position. I'm not necessarily in it. They're not necessarily more informed than me about it. The company definitely is the most informed party of anyone looking at it. So I would say they
Going
are
back to the
exploitive in
sweatshop,
the sense
right?
that
They're
there's an
choosing to
asymmetry of
work there on a
information and
daily
power.
basis. Action demonstrates preference. It means that for them is, in their view, the best alternative, and they're going to know what their options are. I mean, if you're
Yeah, I don't think I'll just stop there because I would say I don't think action demonstrates preference. I think sometimes it does. I wouldn't say it always does.
can
I
you
don't.
think of
That
an
seems like
example where
an
action
idealized
doesn't
assumption. You're
demonstrate
trying to make a
preference?
law-like generalization about that. I don't.
For
You're forced
example,
to do an action. You are given two equally bad options, and you maybe arbitrarily choose. Maybe you or it could be the case that you make something thinking it's a preference and then you realize that it's
I
not.
think it's
I
pretty
mean, I feel
evident
like there's
that action
plenty
demonstrates
of examples
preference.
of that.
That's not really a contentious point amongst everyone. I think it's almost universally accepted.
Well,
You're
no, because when
way
you're
out on
saying
a limb
I
here.
think it is contentious. Because, like, let's say that I get, no, well, no, because you also, okay, so let's say I sign up for a job and
Uh,
maybe my initial thing is I chose this job over a different job. But now that I'm in it, I realize this is not the job I want. Well, now I'm forced to stick to this job until I am,
no,
I
but
find a
you're
different one.
choosing
Well, me
the first and
continuing
the
to work
second
there is
job
not
over the
demonstrating
first
my
one or
preference for
whatever
this job.
demonstrated your
It's
preference
only
at
all
that
it's
time, right? And then okay, later on, you might change your mind, but if the other job's not
well, that's
available,
the problem with it
yeah,
is that
but
preference is not this. You're
it's all
viewing
good.
preference.
What I
Okay,
was saying
sorry,
wasn't that
no,
important
I'm interrupting you. I
enough.
apologize. Um, I oh, okay.
I agree.
I think preference is
I
dynamic. I
agree
don't
that
like you
preference
don't
can
make the static
change.
preference.
But I'm
Your
saying
actions
at
aren't
the
just
time that you make an
choosing.
action, that
So I
demonstrates your
don't.
preference at that time. Like the saying, actions speak louder than words. Like I think it's self-evident because people can lie, right? But their actions are going to tell you how they really feel. Like if somebody says, "I don't like
I
Coke," and then they drink a Coke, it's not that they don't like Coke. They like Coke. Their action demonstrates their preference.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, there's different like I think maybe in some sense you're always going to be choosing something through either preference or fear, but I don't like to me the way that you're using it is you're trying to construct kind of like a systematized version of it that I just don't I think there's too many factors to say like
Well,
oh
I
you
don't think it
chose
is,
this
but I
thing so
also
you
don't think it's
prefer it like
important
that
to
it's
our
more
debate.
complicated than that. I think it's super important because it seems like you're taking
I
something
think it's
that
an
seems
axiom that
like common sense
action
and you're
demonstrates
getting more
preference. I
out
think
of
it's
it than
like
what's actually in
100%
it.
self-evident. But I don't think it matters to the debate about whether or not.
I don't even know if all our actions are conscious, so I wouldn't even say it always shows us that it's preference, right? Like sometimes you do things purely out of fear. Like,
Are
I
you
just
talking
don't
about
think it's
instincts?
like
Like,
this is more in the weeds because maybe it has nothing to do with what
yeah,
we're saying. But
instinct,
no, I
like
would something
instinctual behavior is not an action, right?
sure.
An action is something you choose to do.
I mean, but I don't know even if that distinction's clear. Like it's a
Mm.
continuum between
Well, the
instinct
way
and
that
willful action. I
my
don't think there's just a
understanding of
clear cut.
the way the word is used is action is a choice that you
You
make,
cut it off.
and it could be even inaction. Inaction could be an action. You can choose not to do something, but it's different from like a reflex or instinctual behavior. Like if you get spooked and you
That's
run or
true.
something, like you're not necessarily choosing to do that. It's just hard coded within you.
Yeah, but anyways, I would say like to me, just it may be
What
the
would
case
you
that you have
like?
two
How is
bad
that not
options and you
preference?
choose
You're
something. I
picking
wouldn't
one
say
over
that
the
that's
other. You clearly
preference. I would
prefer
say
one
that
to the
you
other,
are
or at the very least, you're ambivalent between them.
well.
You're picking one just to get it over with. But like, why would you pick one when you prefer the other one more? It doesn't make sense.
Well, there you go. Well, you've already proven the
Right.
point,
If
right?
you
Because
favor them both
there's
exactly
the
the
point where you could
same,
be doing it because
so
you're
action
ambivalent. But
demonstrates preference or
I would
ambivalence.
say
Then,
that
if you'd like to extend it, I mean that's a pretty rare edge case where you would favor two things exactly the same.
or also, so I think there's a further thing we could
You're
add,
gonna
which is
pull.
it also could demonstrate you're being forced, right? That's the third option. You're forced in some sense. For example, if someone puts a gun to my head and says, "If you don't
It sort of is.
lick
You're
my boots, I'll
preferring to
shoot
not be
you."
shot.
I don't think your action there is demonstrating preference. So then here's okay. So let's say I accept that, right? So now I think there's something wrong with saying that action demonstrates preference because it could be the case that the thing that you're choosing is a preference only given the limited options that you are exposed to, but it doesn't show an actual demonstration of
So
preference
because
for
it's
what you
not
want your
utopia, it doesn't
conditions to be.
demonstrate
So I
preference.
think
That seems.
that's the issue.
I mean, we're always faced with
I
limited
don't think it has to be
choices.
utopia. I don't
Like
think it
we
has
don't
to be
always,
utopia, but to
it's
me,
not.
saying that action
I mean, that's
demonstrates
always the case. Where you're faced with limited choices to achieve, your desired goal, and they're not always perfect. But
sure. Well, I don't disagree with that, but I would say that I want to empower people to have more in the limited choices that we have. I
I
mean,
mean,
I don't think
I
that's
agree
crazy.
with
I don't think
that
it ought to be the
to
case that
the
we have to
extent
have these
that
limited preferences.
I mean, it depends on how you want to implement it. I think it's great, sure, empower people to have better choices, sure, but then the devil's in the details, right? How do you want to go about doing that?
Sure. If I could, and because I think at this point we're going to be at a standstill, right? I think we kind
I
of
think that the
found where we
discussion's run its
agree and
course.
disagree, and I don't know if we're going to change our minds at this point on this topic. So maybe, yeah. So maybe if I could turn just to a second more on the idea that like voluntary transactions are necessarily, which is not exploitation,
Yes.
to maybe voluntary. Do you think voluntary transactions are necessarily just? So would you say that like a system of transactions, like a chain of transactions, let's say, where every individual in that chain
Yes.
voluntarily exchange something, that the outcome of that series is always going to be just as well? Okay. So I think that's another problem that I have as well, because I feel like that gets used in a kind of mythology for um, justifying why we're in the position we are right now with like wage work and
I mean,
different classes, property
I
distributions,
think we should
etc.
define
I mean, do you think
justice,
that's a
right?
fruitful
Because
discussion?
I presume you're going to go the
Would you like to go
direction
into
of
that?
saying that inequality is unjust.
I don't think
Yeah.
inequality is
Whereas I
fundamentally
would say
unjust.
that
I
wealth
think
is
if you're going to
created,
have inequality, it
and
needs to be
it's
justified,
just
though.
that the people who created it own it. Whether that results in inequality, yes, it should, and that is just that the person who created the wealth gets the wealth, right? It's like if an artist creates a painting, who should own that painting? There's three options. Either it should belong to all men equally, communism, or
Well,
a select group should decide what gets to happen to the painting, you know, or the third option is that the artist should own it because he created it, right? And that's the option that I hold to.
okay. So going back to my question, I get what you're saying, but do you? So we said that like
Just, yes.
if we have a series of transactions and they're all just, then the outcome is just. So if you take, yeah, so if you take the consequence of that, which would be if there was some injustice within that series,
We've
then the
already
series would be
posited that
unjust,
all the
right?
transactions were just, so I don't
Or
see how there
unjust,
could
sorry.
be an unjust.
No, but I'm saying, no, I'm saying like, no, I'm saying like, let's
Okay.
do a different hypothetical series that's like maybe the same. We'll call it series two, and we change one of those just ones into an unjust one,
I
right?
think the only
So
thing
one
we
of
can
those
say
was
unjust
unjust.
is
Is the
the thing that
distribution
was
now
unjust,
unjust?
right?
So the distribution you would say is just,
I wouldn't
despite
go
the
that
fact that it
far. I mean,
was
I'd rather
unjust
have reference to specifics
actions
to make that
bringing it
conclusion.
about.
But I
So
think if we have a series of transactions, 9 of which are just and one is unjust, all we can say is that an unjust injustice occurred there, and the rest of the transactions are fine. Yeah.
but would you say the distribution is fair? Like, let's say the first one was unjust, and then the rest succeeded that. Would the final
I don't have an opinion
distribution
on
be
that.
just,
That's
despite the fact that the
complicated,
first one was
and
unjust?
I'm not sure. I'd have to consider that. Mhm.
I think that, yeah, and I don't. If you don't want to go into it, that's fine. I'll just say the reason I bring it up is because I think that kind of um thinking is what justifies our current distributions in capital, right? There's this idea that we are all voluntarily exchanging our labor or our capital or some kind of product, in exchange. And so the
Right.
distribution of that is therefore just because we're all voluntarily acting within it, right? But I would say that the issue with that is that because the system came out of a fundamentally unjust world, and because most of the early capital was created through violence and coercion, the current distribution is, I would say, definitely not just. Even though any given action or voluntary action could be considered just on its own, I don't think if you use that reasoning, you can consider the system just in any sense without
There's
doing
definitely
major
an
redistributive
argument for
efforts
that line
to
of thought. In
make up for those
particular,
past
for
injustices.
example, land reform movements, where you have people that ostensibly own the land, but how did they get it? Right? They had the state, take it from these people, and then they're the big landowners, and okay, now we're going to have a free market, but I happen to own all this land that was stolen. So in that situation, land reform and giving it back to the people it was stolen from, or if you look at the Soviet Union, right? They transitioned from communism to capitalism, and the oligarchs got all the state-owned enterprises, and now they're privately owned, but they were given to them, by the state, and they happen to be state officials as well themselves, or whatever,
Right.
So I think absolutely, there can be situations where sure you end up with an unjust system or with a just system at the end. However, because of the inputs, there's a problem, and that should be redressed. I do agree there is a case for that in certain situations, yes.
Yeah. So to me, cool. So I think, yeah, we have some agreement there. I think maybe I would argue more forcefully that this explains a lot of the coercive power of
Yeah, but
capitalism and
I
why I
would
would
argue it
think
doesn't really
even
apply
wage, I
to
would
North
even go so
American
far as to say
society.
it explains how wage slavery is coercive in some sense. I would say it's the main. Oh, I would say it applies here as much as any. Like we went through an industrial phase. We forcefully took land from people. We enclosed land. We took it from Native Americans. There's slavery
What's wrong with
involved.
immigrant labor?
There was even just
What's
the
wrong
use
with
of
immigrant
immigrant labor
labor?
in this country, of all races. What? No, it's not inherently wrong. I think the way it was used was they kind of like people were shipped
But I
here not
mean,
knowing
working
exactly
conditions
what
in general in that period of
being
time, like
that
we're talking
entailed,
19th
and then they were
century, right?
used to do projects that were necessarily good for them.
Or like early 20th. But conditions were
Yeah, I
bad
mean, I
everywhere,
wouldn't
and
just
and
because the
and
conditions
worse
were bad
prior to
wouldn't
that. So
mean
I mean,
that I
yes,
think
things
that
were
they're
bad
justified,
compared
right?
to
Because like,
today, but
what?
we've had 100 years of what?
Well, they were bad for wage workers usually. I mean,
What, like 200 years ago, 300
if you're
years
like
ago?
a independent farmer, I mean, they're decent. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you have to specify because I think like there's kind of two classes of like poor people. That
But
the
the
ones
other
that
thing
work the
was that the
land kind of own their
population
own
was
land in some
tiny, right?
sense,
And the
and then
only
the
way
kind that are
that
wage
you could
laborers. I think this is
sustain
where
a
the
much
distinction
larger
comes from too,
population was through
because
industrial capitalism.
well, that's assuming that you want to increase the population rapidly and bring
I
about
think it
industrial
stands to
capital,
reason
which
that
I mean,
a
good
larger
things
population is
result from that,
better. I
and
mean, it's
also
wrong to kill
injustices result from
people,
that, right? Like, I
but
don't
it's
think it's
good
all.
that people be alive and can experience the miracle that is consciousness. No, I'm not saying you
I
are.
mean, I'm neutral on that, but I'm not advocating that you kill people to lower the population. I'm just saying I don't need
Personally, I want to see a
you.
humanity that has a
Oh, okay.
trillion people
I don't
spread
think you
throughout the
necessarily need to
stars,
like rapidly expand your
colonizing not only
population,
our
though. I
solar
don't
system,
like.
but
I
also
think there's
Alpha
usually.
Centauri and the rest of the Milky Way galaxy. And we can't
Well, I
disturb
think
any
I'm not
alien
opposed to
plant
that. I
life
just it
along
would
the
depend
way.
on if
You know, we
it's
should
gotten there
debate
in a just way or not, it
veganism
seems. But
versus carnivory sometime if you're interested. I think it might be a good discussion. So, should we
sure,
wrap this
I
up,
mean
or does anybody have any
that.
questions?
I
What do you
mean,
think?
I'll do
Are you
that. Yeah.
done?
Yeah, I think we've laid out our visions. So if anyone wants
People
to
might all be
jump in and
AFK,
ask
so
questions, I'll
they could
end the
be
recording in like
doing the cleaning.
30
Oh, we
minutes
got
if
one
or when people
unmute.
stop.
So,
Yeah, I know.
who are you asking? What was the question? Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
if you
What
don't
was
mind me
what do
asking,
I do
what
for a living?
country
Was
do
that the
you live in?
question? Oh, I
Yeah, I
live
was
in the
asking you.
Philippines, although I am Canadian.
No, I said, what country do you live in? Okay, the only reason I asked is because when you had said that in your country,
You guys don't have soup
like if
kitchens?
anyone needs a free meal, they can get it. I was like, I wonder where that's at because here in the U.S., that is not the case. We do, but well, at least I can speak for my state. They're heavily
Yeah, I mean, I don't know
underfunded,
all the
and they
specifics.
usually run
I've
out of food within the
been
first
blessed to
couple of hours.
never
So
have
if
to
you're
eat
not
in a
lucky,
soup
you're
kitchen.
pretty much
Although I did
SOL.
once use a food bank, but I don't know all the details of it. But I just know they exist and that homeless people, even without income, have no problem finding food in the cities that I've lived in. Yeah, I mean, Canada does have a bit more of a social
Okay.
safety
No, I
net,
was
as
just
they love
curious.
to
When I heard
say.
you say that, I was
So
wondering where you were
it
from.
could be better. I'm anti-union. I mean, I think that because of freedom of
So, do you support
association,
unions
we have to
or are you
tolerate them.
anti-unions?
But I'm in favor of rolling back all their legal protections, even legalizing, for example, yellow dog contracts, which prohibit union activity as a condition of employment. So I'm basically radically anti-union. Oh, yeah. What's your political ideology? Are you a
Okay.
social democrat? Fair enough. Yeah, that's cool. Always good to have an
I'm
open
still
mind.
trying to figure that out. I just joined this group recently, and I'm still learning.
There's a lot of different opinions and viewpoints in this group. It's
Yeah,
nice.
yeah, I like to hear everybody's perspective and whatnot. I mean, I try not, I try. Yeah, I agree, and I try not to ask too many personal questions because I don't want to pry. I just often wonder, what is like someone's personal opinion versus
Yeah.
their current material conditions. But I mean, it's none of my business. But I am curious to know, you know.
Right. All right. I think I'm gonna end the recording, like, just so we can powwow and talk casually. So
Yeah, absolutely. I
thank
thought
you
it was a
for
great
coming
discussion.
on and arguing your
Um,
position.
it
It
flowed
was a
pretty
good
well.
discussion.
I mean, I don't know if we discovered any new ground or anything, but I thought that you made some excellent points and argued your position pretty well. I felt that just the general vibe was good.
Likewise.